information about how to label and how to do things like that. Okay, so polynomial can be what we call a monomial or made up of monomials. So that's the little definition I have right here. It just says an expression that's either a real number, so I'll just make something up. So like it could just be a plain number, like the number 3. It could be a variable, so maybe just literally like an x, or it can be the product of real numbers and variables with whole number exponents. Okay, so something that would look like a product of real numbers, variables with whole number exponents, maybe something like 4x squared. That would be that kind of that last part of that description. The only thing I maybe want to say to you, you shouldn't see this in this unit at all, but the exponents have to be plain numbers. Whole numbers means they have to be positive, and they can't be like 1.5 or 1/2 or something like that. We'll deal with the whole unit second semester where we have exponents that might be a fraction or something, but that's not this unit. Okay, so you should see nice plain numbers for exponents on any of your variables. And please forgive on my little example here. This should say +5 if that's kind of faded. So I just have a little polynomial there. It's 2x cubed minus 5x squared minus 2x plus 5. So if you guys were looking at that, how many terms does that have? Can you tell? Like how many different terms? A monomial is also kind of an interchangeable word with a term and a polynomial. Like how many terms do I have here? Does anybody know? 4, exactly. Yeah, they're just separated by addition and subtraction. So like the 2x to the third, 2x cubed is a term, 5x squared, 2x, 5, those are terms. Now, I do have a couple names here for you guys, and just a couple, if you don't know them. The leading term, the first term, has the highest power of x, so that would be that 2x cubed. What we're going to call the leading coefficient is just the number 2. That's going to be really important when we start doing some graphing a little bit later in this unit, but the leading term should be the highest power of x. And then you guys can see the powers of x go down in order. So like 3, 2, 1, and then plain number. This is written in standard form. So all you have to be written in standard form is highest to lowest power on the variables. And then if you do, like I have a 5 here, plain number, we call that a constant, would be last. Oh, thank you. All right, so highest to lowest power on the variables, that's going to be your standard form. And then if you have a plain number, that always goes last. And then what we're going to get into in this little table is just how to label. Now, some of these you might know and some of them maybe not, so we're going to go through these, but I just have an example of each. So, just a plain 10 all by itself. We're going to label these based on degree and number of terms. The degree is based on the highest power on your variable. The number of terms, like I just asked you about that one above there, and we said 4 terms, you just got to count how many different pieces you have. So, the degree, if I don't have a variable, I don't have an exponent on a variable, so if I don't have that, this would actually be considered a degree 0. Just a plain number because there's no variable, so there's no exponent, highest power or highest exponent on your variable. I don't have that here, so just 0. Now, the name for just a nice number, like I just have the number 10, this is called a constant. And I just literally, just the number 10, so I just have one term there. And if you have one term, that was that definition at the top, that is just a monomial. One term. All right, now the next one, I've got just 2x plus 9. What would I say my degree is for that? If it's the highest power of the variable, what would you say for 2x plus 9? What would be the degree? Just 1, exactly, yes, just 1. Just what? Just, they're not going to write x to the first power. You just have an x, but that is x to the first power. That's considered a first degree. Okay, now, if you guys think about this for a second, it's just an expression, but if I had like y equals 2x plus 9, right? That'd be mx plus b form. That'd be a line. This is linear, is what it's called. If your highest power, just a plain x, that would actually make a line if we graphed it, so that's called linear. How many terms do I have if I have 2x plus 9? 2 terms, right? Okay, does anybody know what 2 terms are called? Monomial is 1 term. Does anybody know what it is for 2 terms? Binomial, exactly, binomial. Like a bicycle has 2 wheels, so a binomial has 2 terms. All right, now these are based on the exponents on the variable, not the number in front or the coefficient. So if I'm looking at this next example, I've got 4x squared plus 3x plus 2. The degree is based on the highest power of the variable. So not the 4, but the 2. So this would be a second degree. Now, this is the whole unit we just got done doing. This, bless you, is a quadratic. And I've got 4x squared, that's a term. 3x, that's a term. 2, that's a term. So I got 3 terms. Does anybody know what a 3 term? Yeah? Yes, like a tricycle has 3 wheels. A trinomial has 3 terms. Okay, now, I think you guys might know this one. My highest power, again, the degree is not the 9. The degree is the highest power on the variable. So for that one, it would be 3. Does anybody know what third power is called? Cubic. Yes, this is called a cubic, is the name for it. Like that would be 9x cubed. We would probably label that, but it's called a cubic polynomial. And then I got 4 terms there. There are no special names for the terms beyond 3, so we just, and I'm going to abbreviate this, but we just call it a polynomial of however many terms. So if it's more than 3, just call it a polynomial of 4 terms is how we would label that. Not a lot of the questions are you going to run into that, but if we had 5 terms, we'd call it a polynomial of 5 terms. If we had 6, we'd call it a polynomial of 6. So only special names, just 1 through 3. All right. Now, my degree, again, is based on the highest power on my variable. So this guy's going to be 4. Does anybody know what the 4th degree is called? I don't know if you guys would hear this term very often. It looks similar to quadratic. It's okay if you haven't heard this before. Okay, the 4th degree is called quartic. And I remember that by thinking to myself that there are 4 quarters in a dollar. So since there's 4 quarters in a dollar, 4th degree is quartic, because it kind of sounds like quarter to me. And then I don't have any adding or subtracting there. We just have 5x to the 4th. So this is just 1 term. So if we're back to 1 term here, it would be a quartic monomial. Special name if we have terms 1, 2, or 3. Other than that, we can call it a polynomial. All right, and then I highly doubt anybody would have heard this one. So the last one, my highest power of x is 5, so this would be considered a 5th degree. This is called quintic. And there are other names beyond this, but we're not going to go for anything higher than a 5th power in this class for labeling of any kind. I've got 3 different terms. The negative 3x to the 5th, that's a term. 6x is a term. Negative 10 is a term. So there's 3 terms here. So this would be a quintic trinomial as the name. And we're going to practice labeling these today. So hopefully we'll remember the terms we've got on here. But for each of the questions, we're just going to basically write them all in standard form and then label them. So we're going to start with our first example here. I literally just have to rearrange. None of these are in standard form. So standard form means the highest power of my variable has to come first. We go down in order with our exponents and we end with our plain number. All the ones in the table were already written in standard form for you. But we're just going to reorganize these terms and then we're going to label what we have. All right, so I've got 9 plus x. How would I reorganize that so it was in standard form? Like, how would you rewrite it? We're not going to multiply them together. We still have 2 separate terms there. How would I rewrite that so it was in standard form? We're going to multiply on the back, though. What do you think? You just have to switch them spots. The x just has to come first and the 9 has to come last. That's literally the only difference. We just have to have the highest power of the variable come first, so the variable has to be written first. And can anybody tell me what you would name this? What do you think? Linear, because you've got an x, and then binomial, because we have two terms. Perfect. All right, now, if I take the second example, I've got x cubed minus 2x squared minus 3x to the fourth. How would I have to reorganize that so it was in standard form? Like, what would it look like if I put the highest power of x, that term, first? What would go first? What do you think? Yes, okay. Now, if it has the little subtraction sign in front of it, you just kind of attach it to that. So I'm going to start this negative 3x to the fourth. The next, then you just go down in order, your powers of x. Now, I have an x cubed. It doesn't have anything written in front of it, so if it doesn't have anything written in front of it, you go ahead and just assume that it's positive. So it'd be plus x cubed, and then we're going to end it with the minus 2x squared. So just the powers go in order. Again, we're basing it on the exponents, not the number in front. All right, so highest power of x, that term goes first, and then they go down in order. Now, let's see, we got a fourth power, so this guy's quartic. And then it looks like we got three separate terms, so this would be a quartic trinomial for the main. All right, and then I got one more. So highest power of x has to come first. So if I'm looking at this, 4x, and then I've got a minus 6x squared, the 6x squared has to come first. It has a subtraction sign in front of it, so you just keep that attached to it. So we're going to start out negative 6x squared. The 4x doesn't have anything in front of it, so go ahead and assume that's positive 4x. And then the plane 7 is actually going to stay where it's at. That was in the right spot. And for my name, this guy, x squared, is going to be the quadratic, just like we got done with in our last unit. And I got three terms on this one also, so this is a trinomial. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, on the back, we're just going to do a bunch of simplifying different formats. We're going to add, we're going to subtract, and then we're also going to do a little distributive property and a little multiplication. So, when you're working with these, we're going to put them in standard form when we write them out. Don't factor anything today. Some of these you'll be tempted on. We're just going to add or subtract, maybe multiply, and then combine like terms. That's all we're doing. If you are adding polynomials together, so just, I've got 3x squared minus 10x plus 5. I'm going to add 10x squared minus 4x minus 11. We're just going to drop the parentheses. If you've got just adding, nothing in front of the parentheses, nothing like that. We are literally just going to add these together. And if you want to, just go ahead and add right from the parentheses. That's totally fine too. I'm just going to copy it down real quick. That just adding doesn't change any signs, doesn't distribute anything, nothing, just drop the parentheses, combine like terms. Now, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to do this on my paper. So, you want to start with the highest power of x. So, the highest power I see here is an x squared. So, any terms with an x squared, we want to combine those. So, I've got 3 here, 10 here. Just add them up. So, I should have 13x squared. Then I'm looking for the next power of x. So, then I'm seeing negative 10x and negative 4x. They're both negative, so they're going to get more negative if we combine them. So this should be negative 14x. And then any plain numbers. So I've got a 5 here and a negative 11. So it would just be 5 minus 11. So that would be negative 6. That would be the standard form. And then for your name, all you're going to do, highest power of x is 2. So this would be quadratic. And we ended up with 3 terms. So it would be quadratic. I don't know why I just wrote binomial when I said 3 terms. Trinomial, sorry. Now, if you are subtracting polynomials, this is a little trickier. If you don't have anything in front of the parentheses, like I don't on that first polynomial, 9x squared minus 5x plus 2, I would just drop them. Just drop them. Just 9x squared minus 5x plus 2. Now, if you are subtracting. This can be super tricky. So you have to subtract each term in the polynomial. So you have to think about that, like distributing a -1 to each of those terms. What it should do, and you can drop the parentheses when you do this, but just distribute like a little -1 through each one of those. It should just change the sign for each. So that first term would become -3x squared. All right, if I do minus a negative or negative times a negative, we should end up then with plus 5x, and then negative times that 10, or just distribute it like a little -1, that would turn that into a -10. And then I'm just going to do what I did on the exact last question. We're just going to combine like terms here. All right, so my x squared is the highest power I see. I've got two different terms. Just take the numbers in front, add them or subtract them. I'm going to subtract in this case. 9 minus 3, this would give me 6x squared. Then any plane x's. And this one's a little bit weird. So I have a -5x, but then down the line here I have positive 5x. So those would actually cancel each other out. They would add up to 0. So we won't have a linear term here. And then for my plain numbers, I got a 2 and a -10. So that would just be combined together a -8. And again, like I look at that and I immediately go, oh, those are both divisible by 2. Don't factor anything today. You want this in standard form. So I don't want any parentheses. We don't want to factor out a greatest common factor, nothing like that, because we don't want any parentheses. So just leave that alone. And then this guy, quadratic, and I've only got 2 terms, so this is a binomial for the name. Is anybody having a question? It's not terrible. Okay. Now, these next couple, we're going to have like a little distributive property, but we're just going to add together polynomials or subtract. We might just have to do a little distribution, and then I do have 2 questions where we're going to multiply. All right, so on this guy, I've got 8x squared plus 6x minus 3. I'm just going to drop the parentheses. There's nothing in front of those. The second set of parentheses I'm adding, but I want to do a little distributive property with this 2x. So see if you guys remember from properties of exponents. What am I going to get? I'm going to run the 2x through all these terms. What do I get if I take 2x and I multiply that by 5x squared? What would that end up being? Perfect, 10x. You can always multiply. You can't always add or subtract. If you're adding or subtracting, you have to have like terms, but you can always multiply. What you do, multiply the numbers, so 2 times 5 is 10, and add the exponents on the variables that are the same. Now, they don't, like I told you guys on the front, if you just have a plain x, that technically has a first power, but you would rarely, if ever, see that actually written in there. So when I do x times x squared, that becomes x to the third. What am I going to get if I do 2x times -3x? Like, what would that turn into? 2x times -3x. Thank you. -6. Wait, x, what would the exponent be? Squared. Okay. Now I got 2x times -3, so just 2x times -3, just -6x. And then I'm looking for standard form here. Now, on this question, the highest power of x, and I only have 1 term, but I do have an x to the third. So I'm going to write that first. There's nothing to combine that with. So I've got a 10x to the third. And then, let's see, I got an 8x squared and a -6x squared. So if I put those together, 8 minus 6 would be 2x squared. And then, oh, this is actually similar to that last question. I have a positive 6x and a -6x. So those actually cancel each other out, so we won't have that term. And then I have 1 plain number, -3, nothing to combine that with. So this will be my answer. 10x cubed plus 2x squared minus 3. This is third power is cubic, and I've got 3 terms here, so trinomial would be the name. Does anybody have a question at the moment? All right, now the one next to this, we're going to subtract. So I'm just going to drop the parentheses on that first one and write just the 6x to the fourth minus the 4x squared minus 1. Just nothing's changing that. There's nothing in front of the parentheses. This is subtraction, but also with a little distributive property. So I'm going to distribute -4x squared to the two terms in the parentheses that follow that. Okay, if I do negative 4x squared times 2x squared, we're just going to multiply the numbers, so that would be negative 8. What would our exponent be on that term? X to the what? Fourth. 2 plus 2 would make that 8x to the fourth there. All right, now distribute this like it's a negative 4 question. Yeah. For the third one here, so I'm doing x times x squared. Is that what you mean? Okay, so like if I do x, right, and I do x squared, would you agree with me that x squared would just be 2 x's? So this becomes x to the third. If I do it over here, x squared would be 2 x's. That x squared would be another 2 x's, so it would be 4 total. Does that make sense? So I'm not working with, we're just adding the exponents when we multiply. When you add or subtract though, you don't do anything with the exponents, you just do stuff with the numbers in front, which would be the coefficients. So that like negative 4 times 2, that's where I got the negative 8. X squared times x squared would be x to the fourth. We wouldn't get any higher than a 4 on that one. But I will distribute that like to the negative 1. So negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. And then I would just keep the x squared with that because that one did not have any variable. But you just multiply the numbers and add the exponents on the variables that are the same. If you are just adding and subtracting, you should not change any of the exponents. That can get really tricky. All right, let's see if we can combine some like terms here. So I got 6x to the fourth and minus 8x to the fourth. So this would be negative 2x to the fourth. That's the highest power of x, so that has to go first. I've got, oh, these cancel on this one too. Negative 4x squared and 4x squared. I don't want you guys to think this happens all the time. So it just happens on this question here. So the 4x squareds cancel each other out. One's positive, one's negative. And I kind of wrote over it, but I had a negative 1 here in the mix. So negative 1 is part of my answer. All right, now, highest power of x is 4 here. I don't know if you remember this from the front. This is called quartic. And then there's 2 terms, so binomial. Quartic binomial is my label for that one. Why don't you guys try letter C here. See if you can, and this is subtraction, but it's also got a little distributive property mixed in here. So a little distributive property on each of those sets of parentheses, and then we're going to combine like terms. And then the last 2 questions, all we're going to do is multiplication. And then see if you guys could name it too. Feel free if you want to reference that little table on the front. I just did it real quick up here. Did you guys get 15x squared plus 8x? Okay. Now, again, this one's, I'm tempted to like pull an x out in front, like factor it a little bit. Don't factor anything today. Just leave it. We want it in standard form. So that's our answer. What would I call this one? What would the name be? Quadratic binomial. Perfect. Okay, now I know we did this a little bit in our functions unit. So I'm going to see if you guys remember this, but these last 2, we're just going to multiply real quick. So this is like foil on steroids. And if you are a box person, please feel free to draw a box. But if you're drawing a box, just draw a 2 by 3 to set this up. If you like FOIL a little bit better, it's not first outside, inside, last. I just think about it as like a triple distributive property. And I'm going to write this out because I think I showed this to you guys when we did functions too, when we practiced this a little bit. But I'm going to multiply everybody by 6x squared, and then I've got to go through and I've got to multiply everybody by -5. But I just line them up so I can combine like terms easier. So if you don't remember doing this, I'm just going to go through this one here real quick. So 6x, x to the first there, times 3x squared. Multiply my numbers, so 18, and I'm going to add the exponents on the variables that are the same. So I have 1 here, 2 more here, so it should be x cubed. 6x times 4x, 6 times 4 is 24. X times x, 1 and 1 will give me x squared. And then 6x times -2 would just be -12x. Now, if you like this, I think I told you guys this a little earlier in the year, but the teacher showed this to me a long time ago, and I thought this made it so much easier because you get so many terms here. So when I go through, I'm going to multiply everybody by -5. I just line the like terms up on top of each other. So -5 times 3x squared is going to be -15x squared. So I just write that just right underneath the other term that has an x squared, just to make it a little easier to combine like terms. -5 times 4x would be -20x. So again, I just line it up right underneath the other term I had that had a plain x. And then there won't be anything to line this up with, but -5 times -2 ends up being +10. So I just kind of put that on the end, nothing to combine that with. Same argument for the 18x cubed. There's nothing to combine that with, so just right there by itself. 24 minus 15 is 9x squareds. -12, -20 would be -32x's, and then there's nothing to combine the 10 with. Now the name for this would be cubic, because I have a third power, and then we don't have any special names beyond 3 terms, so I would call this a polynomial, which I'm just going to abbreviate, I'm right, poly. So polynomial of, I've got 4 different terms here, would be my name. And then I have one more, and you guys, I'm doing this with you right now. You'll actually see this a little bit later in this unit. This is called a sum of cubes. So when you multiply this out, it's just going to look a little weird when you get done. But I'm going to run an x through all those terms. So x times x, x cubed. X times -5x would be -5x squared. X times 25 is 25x. And then if you liked what I did on that last one, I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to line these up. So if I do 5 times x squared, I get 5x squared. 5 times -5x is -25x. And 5 times 25, and you guys could grab your calculator for that if you don't know it off the top of your head, but that's 125. And the weird part here, the x squareds and the x's both cancel when you do that. So I'm just left with x cubed and the 125. And this would be called cubic, and then I only ended up with 2 terms, so a binomial. Is anybody